Hi, welcome to Constitutional Chats, hosted by me, Janine Turner,
and Kathy Gillespie,
with students
Dakari Chapman
and me, Tova Kaplan.
Join us as we discuss hot topic issues with constitutional experts. It's sponsored by Constituting America.
Hi, it's Janine Turner. Welcome to Constitutional Chat. We're thrilled you're with us today. Come on in. We have a great show, little known signers of the Declaration of Independence, and we're getting very close to July 4th. Can you believe that? Aren't we? So this is really fun. And we backed by popular demand is Gary Porter, who's always fascinating, has great stories to tell us. He also has written the essay on this particular signer. So we're very, very excited to have him with us. Come on in, George Ross. We're going to talk about George Ross. Did you know about George Ross? Probably not. Neither did I, which is why we're talking about one of the little known signers of the Declaration of Independence. Come on in. We'd like for you to fill out a little form. And on this form, you can tell us how old you are, middle school, high school, so we can gear our presentation toward you. So scroll up and down. Let us know if you're a teacher or grandparent, parent, family, friend, a donor, things of that nature. And I'm going to introduce Aubrey while we do this, because Aubrey is our director of media, and she's just responsible for all of our fabulous technologies. She is also our We the Future Best College STEM winner. She's born in Utah as the middle of 7 children, a captain and 7 children. What's the fearsome lot of that? What is that from? Sound of Music. And she's a student at Brigham Young University and aspires to be an athletic coach. So she's going to show her face in just a minute after she tells us the results of our little poll. So Aubrey, have enough people had a chance to sign and tell us who they are yet?
Yeah, I think we're good to go.
Okay, so there she is.
All right, so we have 20% parent and grandparents with children with us today, another 20% of friends. Then we have 16% fans, 16% middle and high school students, and we have 12% teachers, 16% donors. So pretty even all around, and we're so excited for all of you to be here today.
Yay! Thank you, Aubrey. All right, I'm going to do a very brief introduction so we can spend all of our time talking about George Ross. I'm Janine Turner. I'm founder and co-president of Constituting America. I'm also an actress. You can go to JanineTurner.com to check out all that. But I'm co-president of Constituting America and thrilled that you're with us here today. And I want to introduce Kathy Gillespie. Kathy Gillespie is the other co of Constituting America. She's an extraordinary person, the dearest, most wonderful soulmate friend in the world. And we also have the great pleasure of having worked together on this foundation for 11 years now. And Kathy is one of the few chosen people of all of America, one of the few 16 or 17 chosen to be on the commission of the semi-quincentennial celebration. They are planning the big celebration for the 250th anniversary of our country. She was also chief of staff on the Hill for decades. And she was also, what was it, Kathy? You were the commissioner of the White House Fellows. So she was in charge of that for a lengthy period of time too. Kathy Gillespie, say hello. Please tell us about today's donors.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Janine. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for your leadership of Constituting America. I have a great job because I get to work with you. So we want to thank our sponsor today, Leanne Damon Broom from Virginia. Leanne is a frequent listener and viewer of Constitutional Chats and is a great supporter of our online auction. And Leanne, thank you for sponsoring today's Constitutional Chat.
Yes. Thank you very, 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 very much. Wouldn't be possible without you. Now I'm going to introduce the extraordinary Tova Love Kaplan. Tova Love Kaplan is she's won our contest 3 times. And she's also the, what do we call it? National Youth Director. She's a National Youth Director of Constituting America in our Youth Council, which she runs like a CEO of a top 100 company. And she's passionate about inspiring young people to know and use their constitutional rights. She's only 17. I think we've known you since you were, if we subtract 3 or 14, 13 years old. And she's won for PSA, STEM, and marketing plan. She's also created an app and marketing plan. So you're going to see, look at this face. You're going to see Tova Love Kaplan at the UN as our ambassador, or at the as Secretary of State, or whatever she wants to achieve, she will definitely achieve. She speaks 3 languages. She's amazing. Say hello, Tova Love Kaplan.
Thank you so much, Janine. I love your introductions. They're the highlight of my week. But I'm so happy to be here. I don't know how Janine and Kathy keep coming up with such interesting topics to do these talks on, because I'm really excited for this. And I hope you all enjoy. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you, Tova. All right, now our new team here, Jordan and Jewel Gilbert. Drum roll, please. They are also winners of our contest, and we've known you guys for about 3 years too. The extraordinary Jewel and Jordan Gilbert. Jewel Gilbert is executive producer, and Jordan Gilbert, they're brothers, they're not twins, they're brothers, is operations director for Sing for America, a family-based company that the brothers co-founded. Hey, I just want to know, do y'all get along during this work process? You're just going to have to give us a little insight. Sing for America seeks to show the art of truth and light, capital T and L, through live performances. Both are proud former We the Future contest winners, and we're so proud of them. Sing for America is an actor-run theater company which specializes in semi-professional musicals, private training in the arts, school drama solutions. That's kind of cool. School drama solutions. I wonder what that means. And public entertainment events, all while revealing a colorblind world stage. And Jewel and Jordan just recently graduated from Moravian College, where they earned a BA in musical performance and dramatic production. So, you know, Jewel and Jordan are, wait till you hear them. They're not just artists, they're intellectuals. They're intellectual seekers based on a great foundation of faith. And we're thrilled to have y'all here. Say hello, Jewel and Jordan Gilbert.
Hello, everybody. We're happy to be here. I think we always get along. It's just not pretty. So there's a lot of times.
Not pretty? Is that what
Yeah.
you said?
Yeah. So part of the easy part of working with your family, if you really love what you're doing, and it's not just a family business, is that you can be completely unbridled sometimes. You just want to get the thing done. So I think we always do get along. It's just that if you were here, you'd think we weren't.
I can relate to that.
Yes. Sometimes you take
welcome to the show.
Take a walk.
Yep.
And come back, then we're ready to strap back in. So
Yeah.
even if we're mad, it never lasts long.
Yeah.
Cool off a little bit. Well, Kathy and I are like that because we're so close. We're like sisters. We're like soulmates. So we understand that situation. Okay, welcome to the show. Now, ladies and gentlemen, back by popular demand, our extraordinary scholar today, Gary Porter. Gary Porter is Executive Director of the Constitution Leadership Initiative, a project to promote a better understanding of the U.S. Constitution by the American people. CLI provides seminars on the Constitution, which are quite wonderful, by the way, including one for young people utilizing our Constitution Rocks as the text, which is very nice of you, Gary Porter. That's my daughter's book.
Yep.
Gary presents talks on various constitutional topics, writes periodic essays published on several different websites, and appears in period costume as James Madison. I have seen this, ladies and gentlemen, and it's wonderful. Explaining to public and private school students an example, Madison's role in the creation of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Gary can be reached at gary@constitutionleadership.org, on Facebook or Twitter at @constitutionled. Hey, Gary, back by popular demand. Soon, I think this is your third time? Fourth? Where are we on this?
I've lost count, but they're all fun.
There.
So,
Well, welcome, and we know you're going to tell us a little bit about Gary Ross, and then we will pepper you with questions.
right. Well, George Ross is somebody that I didn't recognize when I was first assigned to write about him, I'll have to admit. And there are 56 signers, so, it is reasonable that you'd forget a few of them, and some of them are familiar, Jefferson and Franklin and well, let's see, James Wilson. Several of those are much more prominent. But George Ross, I honestly didn't know the name, and I didn't make the connection when I first saw George Ross Jr. With his very famous niece by marriage. But George Ross falls into one category of three different categories that define the signers of the Declaration of Independence. First, you have men who were there at the beginning, if you will, at the beginning of the debates over the Declaration, and they got to do the wordsmithing of Jefferson's rough draft that he presented on the 28th of June, and then they stuck around, and in August, when the engrossed copy was available, they got to sign it. So that's group one. Group two are gentlemen who took part in the debates, but for various circumstances, either they chose not to sign it or they got replaced, as is the case coming up. They did not get a chance to sign the final document. John Dickinson is one of those gentlemen. We'll talk about him. And then the third group are gentlemen who came late to the party, if you will. They were assigned to the Continental Congress too late to take part in the debates over the Declaration, but sometime before August 19th, they showed up and began signing the Declaration. Because they represented their states and they wanted their states to be so represented by their signatures. So that's George Ross Jr. And there's an interesting story about how he got to be in that group, how he got to be in the position of being able to sign the Declaration without having participated in the debates. You may recall that Richard Henry Lee's resolution for declaration was introduced on the 7th of June, 1776. And it was immediately apparent that there was going to be controversy over this. And a lot of the delegations had come there with instructions they could not vote for independence if it came up. New York famously was one of these. So a vote on Lee's resolution was postponed for a month, not quite a month, to the 1st of July. So when the 1st of July rolls around, they debate in the Committee of the Whole the merits of Richard Henry Lee's resolution for independency. And they take a test vote, and because they're in the Committee of the Whole, this test vote is not binding. But in this test vote, there were several states that voted against going independent from Britain. Pennsylvania was one of those. Pennsylvania had 7 delegates, and their vote within the delegation was 4 against and 3 in favor. All right. New York abstained. New York had not received new instructions on how they could vote or whether they could vote for independency, so they had to abstain. South Carolina voted against it, and Delaware's delegation was not complete. Caesar Rodney was home in Delaware sick with, I believe it was cancer, and he was not present, so Delaware was split, 1 in favor and 1 opposed. So their vote was officially registered as a null vote. All right, that's the 1st of July. We're looking for unanimity. We want this to be a unanimous declaration of the states, and we don't have it. There's 4 states that 4 out of the 13 that just say we're not going to be part of this. So they postponed the final vote, the vote in the Congress itself, not in the Committee of the Whole, but in the Congress, the vote will be the next day. South Carolina has a meeting of the minds within their delegation overnight.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second. What day are we? Where are we? July?
Now we're on July 2nd.
Okay, so it's postponed because they don't have all the votes, right?
Well, they want unanimity, and so they want to find some way to get it. So the final vote isn't taken that day, the 1st of July. The final vote is taken the following day on the 2nd of July. So a lot of things happen overnight. First of all, South Carolina apparently meets, and they have a meeting of the minds within their delegation, and they decide they're going to vote for independence. All right. New York doesn't still receive any instructions from their state, and so on the 2nd of July, New York still has to abstain. It's not a no vote, it's an abstention. So that's a little different than a no vote. Delaware's delegation, there's Delaware's state coin, if you look on the back, has a relief of a guy named Caesar Rodney, because Caesar Rodney somehow got word that on the 1st of July, his Delaware delegation was split 1 and 1 in favor, 1 against. And he says, that won't do. I'm sick, but I'm still ambulatory. I can get on my horse and I can ride, and he does. He jumps on his horse when he gets the news. He rides all night from somewhere in Delaware. I'm not quite sure which city he started out in, but he rides to Philadelphia, and he arrives the next morning, the 2nd of July. And according to the account I've read, he walks into the Continental Congress still in his riding boots and spurs, which of course is not the apparel of a gentleman, but he doesn't want to delay this any longer. And Caesar Rodney's presence then turns Delaware from a 1-to-1 into a 2-to-1 in favor of independency. So South Carolina's on board, Delaware's on board, New York is still abstaining. What happens in Pennsylvania? Well, Pennsylvania's vote was 4-3 against independence. There are 2 delegates that who can't, in their own sense of the rightness, vote for independence. They think there's still room to work things out with Great Britain to find some negotiated settlement to this situation they find themselves in. One of those is John Dickinson, who is married into a Quaker family, and a lot of anti-war sentiment runs in the Quaker community. The other is Robert Morris. So those were 2 of the no votes on the 1st of July that made Pennsylvania vote against independency. But on the 2nd of July, there are 2 empty chairs in the Pennsylvania delegation. One of those chairs belonged to John Dickinson, and one of those chairs belonged to Robert Morris. Those 2 gentlemen absented themselves from the final vote on the 2nd of July. And that turned Pennsylvania's vote from 4-3 against into 3-2 in favor. And Pennsylvania is now in favor of independency due to the actions of these 2 gentlemen who, although they couldn't vote for it, they saw that the impetus, the momentum, the inertia was for independency, and they didn't want to stand. They didn't want individually to stand in the way of that. So they absented themselves, knowing what the effect would be on their delegation's vote. So that's a pretty interesting characterization of these guys. These gentlemen were convicted in their conscience enough. They knew they couldn't vote for independence, but they saw that the overwhelming majority of the delegates were in favor of it. So if they showed up on the 2nd of July and voted, they would have to vote their conscience. And the result would still be the same for Pennsylvania, 4-3 against. But they took leave and played hooky, however you want to look at it. But they were not there, and the vote went then in favor of independence in Pennsylvania's delegation. John Dickinson then resigns from the Continental Congress a few days later. And he and 2 other gentlemen are replaced, Humphreys and Willing. And those 3 gentlemen then had to be replaced in the Pennsylvania delegation. One of those replacements is George Ross Jr. So that's how George Ross gets into the Continental Congress and is able then a month later in August to actually sign the document. That's why we know him today. He got to sign the document because he was a replacement for one of those 3 gentlemen that that left the delegation after the signing of after the vote for independence on the 2nd of July. So that's a unique circumstance, I think, and it puts George Ross in a kind of a singular light that he got to be there because of the moral conviction of John Dickinson. And we will talk, I hope, about this moral conviction of duty to country, duty to self, duty to your God, and voting your conscience. And there's a lot wrapped up in that. We could make a whole presentation, a whole discussion around that topic alone. But John Dickinson exemplifies duty to your country. He was a skilled lawyer, and his skill as a lawyer got him appointed as the Crown prosecutor in his area. He married a lovely, vivacious, beautiful wife, and she unfortunately died early at age 42 before he got into the Pennsylvania State House and then eventually the Continental Congress. George Ross himself dies early at age 49 from gout. So that shows us that, people didn't live to the ripe old age of 70, 80, 90 back then. There were many things that they encountered, physical things that they encountered that medicine at the time couldn't take care of. I'm sure that George Ross today, if he had encountered the kind of gout that he experienced back then, would have had no trouble surviving and living to a ripe old age, but it overcame him at age 49. So the connection to Betsy Ross. Well, George Ross comes from a very large family of either 16 or 15 kids, depending on whose count you pay attention to. So he had a lot of brothers and sisters by two mothers. I mean, his husband, the first wife died early, and he married a second wife. And so George Ross has half brothers and half sisters galore. But George's brother, John, ends up marrying Betty Griscom. And Betty Griscom then, through marriage, becomes Betsy Ross. And she then is a seamstress in the town of Philadelphia. And as the story later comes out, she helped George Washington decide on a 5-pointed star rather than a 6-pointed star for the flag that the Continental Congress commissioned to be sewn. Now, over my, let's see, if you're looking at it, it'd be my left shoulder are those three gentlemen: George Washington talking with a young child, and George Ross Jr. and Robert Morris was the third of this committee that was sent to speak with Betsy Ross and talk to her about making a flag. Now,
can you say those names again? The three who
right,
were
George Washington.
Uh-huh.
In the painting behind me, he's I'm not sure how things look to you guys, but he's on the far right. He's sitting on the far right. Yeah. The guy kind of holding the flag, I believe that is George Ross. And I think that if I had had time to look up a picture of Robert Morris, I would have found that he is, in fact, the gentleman, the third gentleman standing there. And then Betsy Ross is depicted in this famous painting doing something with her hands there. So these three gentlemen went to Betsy Ross to commission a flag, and George had wanted a 6-pointed star. Betsy Ross pointed out, wait, that's way too hard. It's much easier to make a 5-pointed star than a 6-pointed star, and we'll get the flags, produced quicker, and they'll be cheaper. And so the 5-pointed star that we now have was a result of that conversation. So there's another unique thing that George Ross is connected to by being part of that 3-man committee. Now, whether he knew, I assume he knew the family connection between he and Betsy Ross, because he certainly knew she was the wife of his brother. So, but I don't know of any other connections or dealings that the two of them had, other than this one time when the committee came to commission Betsy to sew a flag. George Ross lived in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where he had set up his law practice. Betsy lived in Philadelphia, of course, and the two are far enough apart, several hours by horseback, that I don't think they probably had a lot of or very often encounters. But certainly this one brought them together. So
well, that's all fascinating. Is that it? I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
Well, towards the end of his life, he didn't know it was coming to be the end of his life, but later on, the town of Lancaster votes George Ross a substantial gift, like 500 pounds, just for his service. He served in the Pennsylvania legislature. He served in the Pennsylvania Constitutional Convention. He served as the Crown Prosecutor. He had a life of service, and the town of Lancaster voted him this very, very handsome gift, which he turned down, saying that it was his duty to do those things, and he shouldn't be recompensed for those. It was his duty as a citizen to take on those responsibilities when his country or his state called. So I think that's a topic that we could segue into, is if in the Declaration, Jefferson says it is not only a right of a people to throw off a tyrannical government, it is their duty to do so, if that is a duty of citizenship, to pay enough attention to your government, what it's doing, that you can take action to throw off a tyrannical government. If that's one duty of citizenship, are there others? We often hear that voting is a duty of citizenship. Is it really? Can we make that stance that voting is a duty of citizenship? It's not an option. You have this duty to be involved in the political process and vote. And if that is a duty, then are there others? Are there other things that we as citizens have a duty to perform when called upon?
I can tell you're a teacher with students. The way you're laying all that out for the follow-up discussion. Well,
yeah,
that's
leading question.
Yeah, that was terrific, and that's for someone who didn't know anything about George Ross and wrote this wonderful essay, and that we learn a lot about him. I want to go back a little bit because I always find it. First of all, my first thought is when he turned down the 500 pounds. If only we didn't pay those congressmen and women in DC that much money, we would have a completely different. I think we would have a government that was more fluid and got along better. And we don't have all these people that stay for years and years and years making $200,000 a year. You know, I think we shouldn't pay them as much because like in Texas they make nothing in the state legislature, like $27, and they go every or $79 or something crazy, and it's every other year, and it's only for 6 months when the legislature meets. It's pretty. Texas has it, and look how big Texas is, and that's all they do. So it's kind of not that we can really change any of that, but what I'm amazed at the providential aspect of the beginning of our country, and how when you talk about duty and doing the right thing, we've become in our country right now so torn apart in the party system. We have forgotten sometimes to have the bigger picture of what to do. And would anyone in Congress like Robert Morris,
would they serve for free?
Yeah. Robert Morris or John Dickinson, is there anybody today that would step back and say, I abstain, I'm not going to be a part of this so that the right thing can happen? I don't know. Kathy may know of a lot of examples of that. I don't really know of a lot of examples of that. And I think that the fact that they did that, because John Dickinson, I believe, went on to fight in the war.
He did.
And then Robert Morris became a huge patriot. I believe he funded a lot of things. I think he also went into bankruptcy, but he funded a lot of things. Was a right hand man of George Washington. Weren't they really close? I think they were.
Yes, quite.
So Robert Morris became quite the patriot, as well as John Dickinson. Didn't he? And he fought in the war, I believe.
Right. He was a colonel in the Pennsylvania militia. And
right.
If you've seen, I'm sorry, if you've seen that John Adams movie.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, that's John Dickinson. The next day, he's out in the street on his horse, riding off to do his duty in the militia.
And would that happen today?
Right.
With someone who stepped back and said, I abstain because I know that the bigger picture, and I know this needs to happen. And then would they turn around and join? It's really fascinating. I think we're so fractious, is that a word, in our country today that people may abstain, but they're not about to go help the country want it. So I think that's something. And it just Caesar Rodney showing up.
Perfect
at that moment to turn that around. And all of this is in the movie 1776 with John Adams, who is by far the best John Adams. Gosh, what's his name? The actor who plays Aubrey. Look up the actor that plays. Daniels. It's something Daniels. No. He plays John Adams in 1776, the musical. Aubrey's gonna look it up. Not the Scowler who did the HBO. That was not. I was really like, that's not John Adams. John Adams had charm, and he wasn't just one note. And you really see that, because I'm the actress. You really see that in 1776. What's his name, Aubrey? Did you look it up?
Yeah, William Daniels.
William Daniels. Fantastic. So everyone for July 4th, Red Don't Walk, get 1776 the musical, but it does lay out all this really well about John Dickinson and Caesar Rodney walking in. So the providential aspects of people doing the right thing, and the fact that had to be unanimous. they had to be unanimous. And the way everything turned around and happened as it did, it's pretty amazing. And the last thing I'll say is just George Ross. Hey, Betsy Ross became iconic because she was just connected to the right man. You know, she had some good connections. Because think of it. Here's probably how it happened. George Ross they're all in Congress. They're thinking about a flag, and George Ross says, well, hey, I got a sister who's a seamstress. You know what I mean?
A niece, yes, but
A niece.
he may have suggested her. That's right.
I have a
Exactly
niece.
right.
I'm sure he did. I have a niece who's a seamstress, and they're like, oh, great, okay, we'll go to her. And then there they go, and she's now so incredibly iconic. And it's wonderful to have this show because now we know that she's iconic because of this. What would it be, uncle that was hers that showed up to do his duty. And it's wonderful that he turned all that money down. So really great story. All right, I don't know any questions I have right off the bat, so I'm going to toss it, other than just conversing with this wonderful birth of our country. But I know Tova's got quite a few questions in store. So Tova, go ahead.
Thanks, Janine. This is really fascinating. So could you just talk more about George Ross's childhood and his background and how you think that influenced his convictions as an adult?
Well, his father was a minister, George Ross Sr., of course, and he had been educated in Edinburgh, Scotland. So he had a college degree. He knew what higher education could do for an individual. And even though George Ross Jr., there's no evidence that he attended college, the biographies that I've read all make note of the fact that his father, George Ross Sr., made an extraordinary effort to make sure that each of his 15 or 16 kids got a classical education. And a classical education, of course, you had to learn Greek and Latin. You had to be able to expound on the Bible in the original Greek or Latin. So you had a college education, what we would probably consider a college education today, even if you didn't go on to college. So George Ross then chooses law as his profession. And fortunately enough, he has a half brother who is in fact a lawyer. And George Ross studies at his half brother John's law practice until he is able to take the bar exam and go into practice for himself. He moves to Lancaster, I guess, to pick up a new clientele. There are probably a host of lawyers in Philadelphia, I would have thought. And so George Ross strikes out on his own to Lancaster, and he quickly gains prominence as a lawyer, enough so that he's appointed the Crown Prosecutor. So he had to have been a sharp individual, a commanding presence, someone able to converse and convincing juries and etc. So I think he would have been a wonderful individual to get to know.
I definitely agree. If only we could build time machines.
Yes.
But I always find it really interesting that I've never heard of George Ross before, and never heard it in school or anything. And yet there's other figures during that time who we hear so much about. And I always find it interesting who kind of seeps into the national narrative and who kind of is left behind in history. So why do you think we as a country or people who study history tend to remember certain people and not focus on others as much? And how do you think that's determined?
Well, I don't think it's determined in the sense that somebody says, okay, these individuals are going to be prominent 200 years from now, but it certainly happens. I mean, it happens because of certain idiosyncrasies about their lives or particular events they took part in. I've seen it said in more than one place that there are about 204, 205 founding fathers. Now, what does it take to be a founding father? Well, signer of the Declaration of Independence, that's 56 gentlemen. Signer of the Constitution, that's 55 gentlemen. Members of the Continental Congress, certainly. And so you get up to about 200, a little over 200 individuals. Now, how many of those 200 individuals, those founding fathers, do we really know? Do we really know anything about their lives? To be honest, I didn't know anything about George Ross Jr. until I was given this writing assignment by y'all. So this has really been great for me to learn about one more of the 56 signers that I didn't know about, and to see the peculiar aspects of his life that are so great to emulate. I mean, his sense of duty. It probably cost him to take on those other assignments. His law practice must have terribly suffered to do that, and yet he did. It was a sense of duty that he had to take on these other assignments: the Pennsylvania Constitution, the Pennsylvania Assembly, the Continental Congress. They just did it.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so kind of on that note, what would you say his lasting legacy is as a founding father?
Well, the reason we've talked about him today is because he became one of the 56 signers. That's really it. If it hadn't been for that singular act, I doubt that we would have studied him at all. But that brought him into the club as a founding father. So he became somebody worth studying, and that's why we do. So and that is, to quote Janine, that was a providential event. Certain things had to fall into place for that to happen, for him to be assigned to replace somebody on the Pennsylvania delegation and get to the point where he could sign the document and become immortalized by his signature on that document.
Thank you, Tova. All right, Jewel and Jordan Gilbert.
Hi, guys.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
So just a quick point question. Do you have any idea why he would have wanted the 6 points on the star?
Oh, it wasn't he. Oh, you mean George Washington? Why? That's a great question. I don't know. I've never seen anyone take on that discussion. Why a 6-pointed star was even in the picture to start with. But I can understand Betsy Ross's reply that, boy, General, a 5-pointed star is certainly easy to make. You ought to think about that instead. she should
right,
know.
I was just curious. And then I wanted to know, was there anything particular in George Ross's life that he didn't get to complete because of his early death? Like, was there anything particular that was important to him that was cut off?
Well, he was, let's see, when he died at age 49, he had just been appointed a judge, if I remember right. And so I'm sure that he was looking forward to that next phase in his life of being a judge. And that was what was cut short by his uncontained gout. So I expect that he was probably looking forward to that, and as judge in the Pennsylvania Court of Admiralty. I know he got to serve there 4 months. So I suspect that he was looking forward to that next phase in his life, and was, it probably doesn't sound right to say it this way, but I think he was probably disappointed to die at such a young age. But his wife now had died at 42, just well, not too many years before, in 1773, I believe. So death at an early age was not that uncommon, and I suspect everybody went around thinking that, boy, I hope I don't catch yellow fever. I hope I don't catch dysentery. I hope I don't catch this or that, because medicine is not gonna maybe help me. So everybody was looking over their shoulder, particularly in the summer months in Philadelphia, because every summer they had a yellow fever event sweep through that city.
And then I know we were talking about how John Dickinson and the other gentleman's name escapes me.
Robert Morris.
Robert Morris, how they remained absent from the vote. And that really had me thinking about, it must have been such an understanding of their duty that even if they disagree, they understood what the people wanted. Right. And as a public servant, I could only I can only imagine that they viewed that as the only right thing to do, because they knew that their selfish ambition couldn't supersede what the people wanted.
Right. What is the common good here?
Yeah, and I'm struggling to imagine many members of office doing that now. So many people have turned into, you have to hear my voice, and yeah, I'll hear your voice, but it doesn't supersede the common good. I just want to know if you want to just expound on that a little bit.
Well, I mean, it's a topic that really deserves its own discussion, but it's something I think every elected representative, every elected official faces. At what point do I vote my conscience? And at what point do I vote for the common good? If there's a discrepancy, I mean, if there's a conflict between the two. And there's no way to predict how you should handle that situation. Should you always vote your conscience, even if you know that it's going to, in John Dickinson's case, it's going to prevent there from being unanimity over such an important topic as independency from Britain? Or should he have just stuck to his guns and said, by golly, I'm still going to vote no, because that's what I believe? But see, he found a way, without sacrificing his own honor, without sacrificing his own conscience, he found a way that the common good could prevail and they could get their unanimous support. Janine's still muted.
Yeah, I don't just want to say, I don't know if today you can actually abstain in Congress and let someone else take over your vote. I don't even know if that's possible.
You can abstain, but you can't let someone else take over your vote.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Jewel.
Yeah, it's a different. I think it's again a difference in understanding action as part of a larger, more fundamental view of life and rights and honor and duty and morality, because it seems like the man had to, like you just said, conscience versus common good, and then they found, I guess, a way to reconcile it in an absentee vote. But I doubt that I doubt that they took it as an easy way out.
No, but it's certainly a situation applicable today. When we send an elected representative to Congress, do we expect him to go up there and then before each important vote, take a poll of his 750,000 constituents, which is the average size of a congressional district, take a poll of the constituents on this issue, and whatever 51% want, that's what he's going to do. That's the way he's going to vote. Is that what we expect? Or do we expect to send this elected representative who we've carefully chosen and voted for and send him to Congress to, quote, do the right thing, to do what he thinks is right, even if 51% of his constituents think that's the wrong thing to do?
It definitely goes back to, I guess, the difference between a representative republic or a democracy, because
exactly,
in all reality, it's built in. There is built in a type of measure against a mob rule. So if he did always vote that 51%, then it would just be a glorified mob rule. It would be, yeah.
Perfect. Yeah.
Why do you think that learning about a man like Ross, what can it offer us? How can we think about it, and knowing these stories and how we really could, if we novelize them, there's thousands of, tens of thousands of stories which tell the story of America, and then there's fewer men who, out of that 200 or so that you said, who have their founding father stamp on, and we really only know a handful of them. But a guy like Ross, who is immortalized somewhat, what do we have to learn from him?
Well, I think he said it best when he turned down that award, that there is such a thing as duty. And we tend to dismiss that today. We tend to look at our own self-interest and say, well, I wouldn't do that. But there is a sense of duty, and I think it is part of being a citizen in a country. I think it's much broader than just voting in elections. I think it's much broader than just answering a call when you think when the circumstances bring you the opportunity to serve in a high elective office. I think it's more than that even. But we do need to have this conversation as a people. We need to be discussing this and deciding, thinking about these rather deep topics. What is honor today? Do we still respect honor? These gentlemen had a very clear understanding of honor, and honor to John Dickinson was absenting himself, even though he was going to take some heat for that. And even though, it says he resigned from Congress shortly thereafter, he maybe was asked to resign from Congress after taking that stand. I could see that happening. So even though certain positions that confront us are going to be unpopular, does our sense of honor still command us to go a certain way?
Okay. Let's see, am I muted? Jewel, I need to go to Kathy. Do you have any? Yeah, Jewel, Jordan, y'all good?
No, yeah, we're good.
Oh, good. Okay. And I will just note as I toss this to Kathy that they didn't want to be known as the bad guys either.
No.
They didn't want to be known as the two guys that ruined the potential for a Declaration of Independence. So I think they sort of wanted to keep a little bit of shine upon their reputations for posterity. And also, I think when you look at George Ross, the fact that he turned down the 500 pounds, which I don't know what that's equivalent to today, but he also turned that down for his children. I mean, his children could have inherited that money. And he thought, no, honor and dignity is more important than this money. So it really is great when you can stick to your principles that the kids might go, hey, we could have used that. but as the example, as a parent, to say no, it's duty. That's leaving a more. I think this is really cool about George Ross, is that's leaving a better sense of character to pass down to posterity for his generations that followed him, and in the hereditary line. Right. That he had that kind of dignity was more important in the long run, but maybe hard to do for the children in the meantime. But character, yes, character. Yep. All right, Kathy.
Well, and in speaking of duty, Gary, and hopefully all our listeners can find Gary's essay on George Ross in our 90-day study. But one of my favorite lines in your essay says that it was not unusual in that period for competent gentlemen to be given multiple important responsibilities or postings. From July 20th to September 28th, Franklin and Ross must have been quite the sight, walking upstairs and down, attending to their concurrent responsibilities in the Congress and the Pennsylvania Constitutional Convention. In addition to presiding as vice president, Ross also participated in drafting Pennsylvania's Declaration of Rights. I tend to think of stress as sort of a modern thing and forget that our founding fathers had very stressful jobs too. It sounds like that they had a lot of big responsibilities going on at the same time.
Well, think about the 5-man committee that drafted the Declaration. You had Jefferson, Adams, John Livingston, Ben Franklin, and the fifth escapes me. But John Adams was on 5 or 6 different committees simultaneously. So he had all kinds of responsibilities. I assume they were quite varied in their oversight, but these gentlemen just said, okay, if that's what we need to do, we'll do it.
And then I wanted to read a couple of audience comments. First of all, Tom Hand says, 6-point stars were more common in the 1700s than 5-point. The Washington Commander-in-Chief flag has 6 points. So there you go. A little bit of an answer to Jewel or Jordan's question. And then Professor James Klinger asks, when did the tradition of instructions sent to national representatives from colonial or state legislatures come to an end? And then Professor Klinger adds, I know that it continued into the 19th century. Why did it end? Do you know anything?
No,
about that?
I've never encountered that question, and if I'm not quite sure I understand what instructions really includes.
Well, what they're talking about is that they never got any instructions. New York didn't. So
like
they
New York,
abstained.
right.
They abstained, and in the movie they abstained courteously. And I don't know if that really happened or not, but they always say we abstain courteously. So that's another providential thing that think about it. What if the message had reached New York from New York to Philadelphia and said, "Don't vote for independence"?
Right.
That would have changed everything too. So think about all the stops and things that had to happen for the declaration to take place. But that is interesting, Kathy. That's a great question of Klinger's, why that they had to wait for, or else the men just didn't have any courage and didn't want to make the decision themselves.
Well, delegations left their home states. Okay, so delegations left their home states with credentials. Every delegate left with a set of credentials in his pocket, and that piece of paper said, "This gentleman bearing this instrument is, in fact, our delegate representing the state of New York." But the credentials would also limit or define the limits to the delegate's authority. We're sending him to the Continental Congress to do this, that, and the other thing, if in fact they wanted to limit his authority. One of the topics that comes up, and I know this is a big leap, but Article 5, it's Convention of 1787 is often called Runaway Convention because they replaced the Articles of Confederation in toto with a new plan of government. But you have to look at the credentials of the various delegates. What were they, and what authority did they have leaving their state as they entered that convention? And when you read their credentials, you see they had the authority to render the federal constitution adequate to the exigencies of the Union. Render the federal constitution, the Articles of Confederation, adequate to the needs of the Union. That's a pretty broad set of authorities that they had. And so I dispute the notion of a runaway convention. They had full authority to do exactly what they did, as did the delegates in 1776 from New York. They had in their credentials, I'm sure, instructions that they could not vote for independence. But things changed. Now there was a resolution on the table. Now they needed new instructions. And so they fired off dispatch to New York, and it unfortunately didn't get back the next day on the 2nd of July, or it didn't even get back from when it probably was sent on the 7th or 8th of June. But it did get back. About a week or so later, New York received instructions that they could vote for independency. They did. And then you had the unanimous declaration of the 13 states.
Oh, is that what happened? I didn't realize.
Yes.
I didn't realize that. So New York finally did vote.
They finally did. They finally got the authority to
I
vote.
forgot that part.
And they voted for.
I didn't know if that was, they just abstained. Okay. Cool.
And that actually ties into a question from David Sawyer, who asked, could you please hone in on and give us your perspective on just how close the Continental Congress came to not moving ahead with the signing of the Declaration, and later in relation to the colony at large, ultimately the unique history-setting revolution against the parent country, England?
Well, it comes down to John Adams, I think, because John Dickinson actually gave a very moving and eloquent and persuasive argument against independence. And John Adams, I don't remember what day this was, but John Adams arrived late that day and just caught the last 5 minutes, 10 minutes of Dickinson's presentation. And John Adams was able to take those points and probably others that he knew Dickinson had made in the past, and turned them around to a very persuasive argument in favor of independence. And I think it was John Adams that his arguments finally carried the day.
That's why I love John Adams. I love John Adams. Yes. And do we have these speeches anywhere? It would be great to read these speeches.
It would, but I don't think there is. Well, yes, I think John Adams's speech is pretty well captured there. I think you can find both his and John Dickinson's speeches.
That'd be great, Kathy, wouldn't it? We should do a series on that and have a series of these speeches at the convention. That'd be a cool series. And to read John Dickinson's and then to read John Adams. Kathy, go ahead.
Well, and then Joseph Crooker asked, what is your favorite part of George Ross?
Well, that's a good question because there's so many things you could point to. I think it was that he accepted this appointment to the Pennsylvania Constitutional Convention while he was a delegate to the Continental Congress. Who would do that? I think most people today would say, well, sorry, my dance card's all full and I can't take on another responsibility. But these gentlemen did. They answered the call.
Well, thank you. Janine, do you have any closing comments or closing question?
Just that I would love to be a fly on the wall and hear John Dickinson's argument, and then you hear John Adams' argument, and how John Adams was on all of those different commissions. And with John Adams, who's really, it's John Adams and George Washington and Alexander Hamilton, and it's just, but John Adams. Okay, look, you can look at it this way. George Washington wouldn't have really been George Washington if it had not been for John Adams, because John Adams appointed or recommended George Washington. Thomas Jefferson wouldn't have been the signer or the writer of the Declaration if John Adams hadn't recommended Thomas Jefferson. And then John Adams was on the commission to figure out what the national bird should be, whether it was an ostrich or an eagle or whatever. So John Adams, and making that closing argument against John Dickinson and swaying everybody back, really and truly, he made George Washington and he made Thomas Jefferson by giving them this great opportunity. Not that they weren't already filled with character and leader. Where would we be without George Washington's integrity? And you can't say one's better than the other. But it was George Washington's, once again, providential hand that said these are the leaders. These are the ones who should do it. And in closing here, I could talk forever about John Adams, but John Adams also really struggled with the fact that no one was going to remember John Adams the way they remembered George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. But he was willing to take the back seat because he knew that if he wrote the Declaration of Independence, nobody would go for it because no one really liked John Adams because he was such a loudmouth. And that he was from Massachusetts and that they needed the South. And so he forfeited his claim to fame. He could have written the Declaration of Independence. That was pretty cool. And he also did the same. Well, he couldn't have led the war. That was something that George Washington had to do. But anyway, that was my closing point. I don't know if we want to give that closing toss to Jewel and Jorn. You have 2 minutes, Jewel and Jorn.
I think we're not muted. Yeah, I think we're pretty much good on as far as our questions. We definitely learned about a new character to add to the story of the founding.
Very good. All righty. I always want to make sure y'all have a last round. Kathy, anything? Okay, then I'll give you the closing statement. And you can tell us, you can follow up with your wonderful essay and tell us about things that you would maybe want us to go see of yours, Mr. Porter.
Oh, well, I don't have anything coming up right now. I have a feeling that James Madison is going to show up the 26th of July at a Republican Women's Conference up here in Williamsburg. But other than that, that's not something the general public could tune into. So I don't have anything that I could point them to right now.
But are you still having your camps when the kids get together?
Oh, no, I've never done a camp. We've talked about it with some folks, but and there are still Constitution camps going on. There's an organization called Institute on the Constitution I'd like to give a plug to that helps conduct those camps. But
okay.
My parting words would just be read about these gentlemen who founded this nation and not just the popular ones as we typically do, but the ones you've never heard of, like John Ross, and look at the lessons that are apparent in their lives. It's worth the read.
Yes. George Ross. Yes. Okay. Very good. Well, thank you so much. And Kathy, tell us about our next founding father, unknown founding father next week.
Yes, we invite everybody to come join us every Tuesday between now and July 4th, 2 p.m. Eastern, for a different founding father or different signer of the Declaration, a little known signer of the Declaration. Next week, we're going to be talking about Benjamin Rush with Bill Federer.
Great choice.
And the week after that, we're going to be talking about Roger Sherman with our guest, Tom Hand. And then on June 29th, we'll wrap up with George Wythe, with author Suzanne Munson. And George Wythe is very intriguing. He's known as Jefferson's godfather.
Very cool. See, really cool. And the series after this is going to be on the Anti-Federalist, just to see what they had to say, which we'll see how providential they were in big government overtaking the state. And numerous other things. So there'll be things we agree with and things we don't agree with the Anti-Federalists. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next Tuesday. Thank you, Gary Porter, once again, Julian, Jordan, Aubrey, and Kathy.
Thanks for the invite.
Thank you for joining us. Okay, bye-bye.